I assume you already heard the good old Hunter x Hunter analysis of, dude, Meruem is like becoming more human and he's like the antagonist, and Gon is the protagonist and he becomes more monstrous. This is kind of an insane thing that happens in this show, dude. The Chimera Ant arc is crazy. And while this is true, it's a real thing and it was intentional, obviously. What doesn't really work for me here is that it's not really comparable, in my opinion. You see, with Meruem, his gradual change kind of makes sense because he's only like, what, a month old? He spent like 80% of his life with Kumugi, which gave her enough time to shift his perspective. He is intrinsically a character that changes fast, he gets stronger fast, he gets smarter fast. Everything he does is basically on hyper speed. He can beat some of the best chess players in the world after playing like twice, or maybe just reading the rules is enough for him. So spending so much time with Kumugi, who is so innocent, and being defeated by her and everything that happens around him, softening him and giving him more perspective makes sense. It also makes sense because we spend so much time with him in the arc as he gradually becomes less and less evil and more thoughtful. So I'm playing this game called Slay the Princess, and I'm loving it, by the way. But in the game, the way you interact with the princess is the way she acts towards you. The slightest dialogue options and the smallest decisions can change her personality completely. You can go from having a nice dialogue with her to her being a total bitch. And depending on how you treat her, she can either absolutely stomp you to death or possibly fall in love with you. And also like 1,000 other things. But what I'm getting at is that Meruem is very much that way. Every interaction for him, because his life is so short and he advances so quickly, changes his perspective almost drastically, but bit by bit throughout the arc in a way that seems gradual and organic. And his human side, his humanity, almost jumps out of him unintentionally to the surface, where he might show thought or care or, dare I say, love for Kumugi. And some might argue that Gon is the same. However, I really disagree. Yes, Gon does show moments and sparks that something might be wrong with him, or that there's something deep buried within his subconscious, and that he might be animalistic or a monster at his core. However, in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, Kite was not built enough for this whole arc, for his character arc, to be impactful or make that much sense. In the 2011 anime, for example, we first meet Kite in episode 80 something, and the only information we know about him is that he was friends with Gon's father, and Gon meet him once when he was still on his home island. Now, you might say, well, yeah, but in the original anime from the 90s and in the manga, he actually shows up in the first chapter, which gives him much more importance than in the 2011 anime, who for whatever reason just messed up. However, I would argue that doesn't really improve it that much. Overall, we still haven't spent enough time with Kite for his death to be as meaningful as the show or the manga tries to make us think it is. If it was someone like Killua or Kurapika or Leorio to die, then I could understand, but me as a person watching the show, especially in the 2011 anime, I don't really care about Kite because we don't really see Kite that much. Kite feels like a character that was made to kill in order for Gon to have an arc. And that's often the case in a lot of shows, but for him, it feels that way. It feels like that was his only purpose. It doesn't feel like he had any agency or a story arc. It just feels like he was there for character motivation so that Gon can have this monstrous parallel to Meruem. Pitou is also a very interesting character, not because of themselves, itself, whichever it is, but because of what they witness. On one hand, Pitou witnesses the most human and kind moments of Meruem's existence. She witnesses when he is the most compassionate and mournful for Kumugi when she almost died. On the other side, we have Gon, who she sees at his worst, most demonic, one of Satan's greatest soldiers, Gon Freaks was. She sees him at his most evil, if you will, most animalistic, most monstrous. And she's like the only one to have seen that. She's the only person to have the perspective of Gon being a monster and Meruem being kind, which is never really brought up in the show or pointed out, but it's just something I thought about, that it's very interesting. But what I'm getting at is that the parallels between Meruem and Gon don't feel as strong due to Gon's transformation being based on a character that we barely spend time with, and a character that Gon barely spend any time with. I mean, I guess you could say that he's just a very kind person who attaches himself fast to people, but like, is it really that justified? Is Gon's whole potential wasted for one fight really justifiable for a narrative perspective for a guy who's spent like maybe a few weeks? I don't think he would have reacted the same if someone like Morel died, and I don't think anybody would expect him to, because it feels weird. It just feels strange. Kite came in and got killed, and that was his purpose in the story. Just introduce the main characters to the end and then die so Gon has some motivation. It just, in a series that's so thoughtful and has so many great plot points and character developments, in an arc that has Meruem, one of my favorite character arcs, one of my favorite characters, one of my favorite villains or antagonists of all time, having your protagonist being written in such a sloppy way makes it kind of fall apart in a way. And I still love the Chimera Ant arc, but every time I'm watching it, I'm not watching it for the Gon portion of the story. I'm watching it for the Meruem and Kumugi portion of the story. Killua's sadness for Gon doesn't feel powerful to me because Gon sacrificing himself for the death of somebody he and I barely know doesn't feel powerful to me. It doesn't make me that emotional comparatively to the death of Kumugi or the motivation of Meruem to change for Kumugi, or especially the death of Meruem himself. Let me ask you this: what made you feel more emotion? Kite's death Gon's adult form and fight with Pito, or the final moments between Komugi and Meruem. And no, I don't mean which made you most excited. I'm not talking about hype moments and aura, but like pure, like actual emotions, like actual care. Does anybody care that Pito got blasted by Gon? Like, if Gon didn't have a different form or looked any different, would you care about what happened? Sure, you might care that he doesn't have powers anymore, or that he's lost his mind as he's the main character and such a good guy, and that's understandable. But does that compare to the final moments between Meruem and Komugi? It just doesn't. It just doesn't feel as earned. It doesn't feel as well built. It's almost as if they had a plot in mind with Meruem, Komugi, and the Chimera Ants, and Gon and Killua had to be there also. But it's almost like Togashi couldn't write it as well. It's still good, don't get me wrong. I like Hunter x Hunter. After the end of the arc with Killua's family, I pretty much think Hunter x Hunter is like a 9 or 10 out of 10 show. But when you have something so good as Meruem, Gon just doesn't feel up to par, in my opinion, and his arc feels a little shallow. But that's just my opinion. Doesn't mean it's bad, doesn't mean I hate it. It just means that every time I go back to it, I don't feel as invested as I feel in the Chimera Ants plotline.